Charlie Kirk's assassination tells us a lot about where we are spiritually and culturally. And why did Pope Leo suppress a pair of Chinese dioceses? The Prayerful Posse explores it all next. Welcome to a very special Prayerful Posse. Be sure to go subscribe to the show. It's a wonderful way to support our work and totally free. So subscribe away, bring friends. And you can support our work at RaymondArroyo.com. A word about Charlie Kirk before I assemble today's posse. I knew Charlie. I interviewed him on Fox multiple times, texted him often. We talked about faith. We talked about politics. He was one of the most effective political activists on the scene. He was largely credited with galvanizing the young vote for Donald Trump in the last election. Well, this week he was shot and murdered, as many of you have heard, in front of a college audience where he was engaging with excited crowds of young people at a Utah campus. Now, some have said he was slain because of free speech. His opponents didn't like what he was saying. I'm not sure that's the reason. I'm more persuaded to believe that he was killed because someone or some group saw him as a political threat. For Charlie Kirk, politics was an avocation, but his faith in God was his real focus. He knew what true religion was. His politics was merely an overflow of that deeply held faith. For too many, politics has become a religion, one worth killing for. After the gains Charlie Kirk made with young voters and his continuing influence, someone apparently thought the only way to stop him was to kill him. What an evil, wicked, horrible thought. We've seen a cultural pattern of this poisonous thought of late. The multiple assassination attempts on President Trump's life, that poor young woman stabbed in the throat by the repeat offender on a train in Charlotte. In June, a shooter dressed as a cop and killed a Minnesota lawmaker and her husband in their home. Then there's the ongoing lionization, the cult status of Luigi Mangione, who shot a healthcare executive in New York City in the back. All of these cases demonstrate the power, I believe, of the demonic and a hatred for human life and dignity. But they also have habituated us to the idea that those whom you disagree with or take issue with for any reason deserve to die. Last week, the Pope said, following that heinous Minneapolis church shooting, where little children were killed during Mass, that we have a pandemic of arms. Perhaps he's right, but what about the pandemic of hatred, the pandemic of ideology, the pandemic of the demonic? When I watched poor Charlie Kirk bleeding from his wound, all I could think was, how diabolical this is. A young father shot before his own child and supporters who looked up to him. Whomever that sniper was that killed Charlie, they probably thought they were ending Kirk's efforts, killing his movement. What that sniper really created were 100 Charlie Kirks. I've spoken yesterday and today with young people on college campuses, and they are hurting. They're furious. But they're pouring all of that into continuing Kirk's example of tradition, fatherhood, family, love of God, and political activism. And that's really what Kirk was all about. Kirk's wife was Catholic, and over the last few months, he began attending Mass with her at their local parish in Arizona. And if you listen to his message in recent days, he could not have been more clear.
Evil cannot exist if there is no standard of good. Evil does not exist. Evil is just an opinion if there is no God. Murder is not wrong if there is no God. Stealing is not wrong if there is no God. And we know as believers that there's an absolute standard above us that we appeal to.
I think we as Protestant evangelicals under-venerate Mary. She was very important. She was a vessel for our Lord and Savior. There's something there. In fact, I believe one of the ways that we fix toxic feminism in America is Mary is the solution.
Young men are going back to church. That is legit. That's happening because honestly, it's the only thing that they can find. It's a life raft in this just tsunami of chaos and disorder. They want something that has lasted. They want something that is ancient and that is beautiful, something that has stood the test of time, something that's not going to change.
Charlie Kirk loved God and his family. And those who watched and listened to him certainly got that most important of messages. I want to bring now Father Robert Sirico in, the founder of the Acton Institute. Father, thank you for being here. What does this represent, do you think, in our history, this slaying of Charlie Kirk, this pattern of political violence and assassination that we're seeing moving through the culture?
Well, it is a very sad day, and you have articulated and outlined many of the problems. I would say that if I were going to look at the root of this thing, it is really the rejection of reason. If Charlie represented anything, I've heard people say he was antagonistic and he was disrespectful, he hated people. But all you have to do is go through his ubiquitous presentations around this country, and he would say, if you disagree with me, come to the front of the line and tell me why. Mm-hmm. He exemplified, I didn't know him. We were in venues together, but I never really got to know him. Yeah. I would love to have had a go around at dinner with him, because I like a man who can reason and who can keep his cool and really seek the truth. And I think this diminishment of reason, which we see particularly in the trans movement, where people don't want to debate it, they just want to cancel you in one way or another. We see it in the disrespect for human life and the very fact that you can't talk about human life and its dignity, the abandonment of reason in that regard, and many, many other issues where people are just so polarized. And when people are polarized, they resort to violence.
Yeah, well, and also, Father, something I've been saying for months, when you don't have a functioning opposition party and you have one that is so damaged, it is really unhealthy for the republic, because what happens is the people who are part of that feel so disenfranchised and without a voice, they believe violence is a way to get your message across. And I do feel there's some of that happening on the political side. But I want you to reflect for a moment about Kirk. Increasingly, and I've watched him over many years, he started as kind of blatantly political and partisan, I would say, talking about the issues, the free market and, the issues of the party that he championed. As time went on, and I guess this came with maturity, and as he was married and had children, he began to focus on faith and family and encouraging young people, particularly young men, go get married and have a family so you realize what this is all about. That striving for holiness in God became the centerpiece of his message. Did that make him a target, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's all of a piece, really. And I think you're exactly right in tracing that in Charlie, because like you, I watched that development, and I was really quite surprised to see a political leader articulating his faith as solidly as he did. This wasn't euphemisms. This wasn't flourish. And many politicians speak about, well, let's pray and, all of this kind of thing. No, he knew what he was talking about. He knew what the core of the faith was. But then he had this ability to reach beyond that and respect people who disagreed with him and ask him why they he disagreed. They disagreed. Yeah. And I think the hatred of a person like that, so compelling, so reasonable, is what produces this.
Yeah. I want to bring in Gordon Chang, who's a international expert. Of course, I always turn to Gordon about the situation in the East. But Gordon, I want to get your reflections on this, on Charlie Kirk and this assassination, and put it in a global context. How does it fit into what we see in other countries? I mean, there are political assassinations abroad. It's something we're unaccustomed to, except in recent memory with Donald Trump, something we were unaccustomed to here in the United States.
Raymond, this reminds me of 1968. You had before that in 63, the assassination of President Kennedy, but in 68, the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and, of course, Martin Luther King. The United States was in turmoil. Eventually, we were able to reconstitute ourselves. We will be able to do that again. But the most important thing, I believe, is that we do have to have faith, because that does bind families together, communities, and, of course, the nation.
Yeah. And you know, Father, you mentioned it. Charlie was such a curious guy. You know, he was self-taught. He didn't go to college. I mean, he went to high school, but he didn't go to college. He built that organization, but he read vociferously. And he always was so curious about how things were done, how you did this. He would always ask me questions about framing arguments and, you know, jokes I would make. He was very curious about those things. And I think as time went on, he realized this is the only answer to all these problems that ail us. It's faith, it's family, it's community. And that message was beginning to emerge, and how horrible that it was cut short. But what are the political consequences of this, do you think? Is what we are seeing the result of heated rhetoric and the demonization of people rather the engagement of ideas that Charlie Kirk really embodied?
Who knows what's going to happen from this? It's going to depend on what we do in the next few days and months ahead, and whether leaders can emerge who can really kind of bring this whole thing together. I think one of the great things that could happen now, and I don't want in any way to appear partisan, but and I don't know the motives behind the person who murdered Charlie, but I think the left needs to apologize for the rhetoric and tone it down. I would like to see some kind of gathering of people one-on-one in group where we can have not just a ornamental conversation, but a real conversation where we disagree in charity. You know, I think that Robbie George and Cornel West exemplify this so beautifully. If we can follow a model like that, I think we can move toward a healing. But there are great cultural plates that have to move right now if we're going to avoid the abyss.
Yeah. Gordon, do you think the heated rhetoric is at such a fever pitch, and the demonization of people, not ideas, has sort of poisoned the well in our political system and media, I might add?
Yeah, it certainly has poisoned the well, but you can have an event like this, an assassination of a beloved figure. It can change the politics. It can change the culture right away because people understand how dangerous this has become, and people then understand the consequence of their words and actions.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I've been talking to a lot of young people, my children included, on campuses, about 4 different campuses. There is certainly an upsetment and a deep wound that's been inflicted through this, but these kids are motivated and focused. And I worry that you don't want them to tip into anger, but they are certainly on fire now and galvanized. And, you know, I'm hearing things like, no, there's no more hiding. I'm going to tell everybody what I think, which I think might be, you know, depending on how you do that, you can go down bad ends there. But
especially in the life of a young person where you're just coming alive to these social issues, you think of it as a stage. How am I going to formulate my positions? How am I going to interact with people? But an event like this brings home the reality of what we're talking about. And if it sobers people and deepens commitment to the kind of conversation that Charlie wanted to have, the pursuit of truth above everything else, then maybe some good can come from this great tragedy.
Well, I hope everyone will keep the repose of Charlie Kirk's soul and the consolation of his family, his wife Erica, their children in their prayers, and God rest his soul. I want to return to a story that we covered last week, Father, this LGBT jubilee in Rome.
Yes.
Look, this story remains rather murky. Vatican spokesman Matteo Bruni was asked about the Vatican involvement in this LGBT jubilee, and he told an Italian journalist this, quote, "The event itself was organized by Tenda di Giornata without the involvement of the Holy See, except for matters concerning organizational aspects connected with the offices that oversee the Jubilee activities," end quote. Father, your reaction to this non-explanation, and what does it tell you?
The first thing we need to do is look at the backdrop of what's going on. We're in the middle of a transition in a papacy. And what policies were established prior to this new papacy with regard to how groups are vetted and coming in. I really simply don't know. I don't remember 25 years ago groups coming in and being vetted and things like that. My understanding of it was all you had to do was go on a website and say, we want to be on a pilgrimage and we're coming. And the logistical stuff that the Portavoce is speaking about is that stuff, but not a seal of approval of the different groups that are thinking. And from my perspective, by all means, come, pray, come through the holy door, go to confession, you know, all of the things that are part and parcel of what it means to make a pilgrimage during a jubilee. This is one thing. The next thing is what happens on the inside. And I can't help but pray and think that there are a lot of very embarrassed gay people at what they saw inside St. Peter's Basilica, kind of like that event that took place at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I think this is very comparable to that. Not keeping your eye on who's coming in the door.
Yeah, well, they used it as a staging ground for a political argument. And then you had James Martin. Father Martin went out and basically worked the press. He had a papal audience, and he walked out to the Reuters and the AP cameras and, you know, started spinning the story instantly, which became part and parcel of defining what was ultimately a private pilgrimage that became or felt like a Vatican-sanctioned event. And the Vatican was, whether they were stupidly twisted and used here, or they were complicit, it's a mixed message that they're sending.
And it's confusion in the middle of this transition. Right. I think we need to, I've seen a lot of online criticism of the Pope, and I don't think that comes into play here. I think that he doesn't have his hands around everything yet, and we're going to talk for a moment, I think, in a moment about China, and I think that also is part of this whole thing.
Oh, okay. So you write it off to kind of the old hand still holding the rudder here, and the Pope hasn't quite gotten control of all the staff on the ship.
Because there was a lot of sloppiness for the last decade, and this is sloppy. And this Pope doesn't speak to me about sloppiness.
Yeah, before I get to China, Father, an Italian priest was just suspended for hosting a live stream where he said the reforms of the Second Vatican Council were incompatible with Catholic teaching. So, you know, you had swift punishment here, and yet you have the embrace of notions and ideas and even ideologies at odds with church teaching. At least that's the public perspective when you have something like this Jubilee happening under the, you know, under the dome of St. Peter's.
It's scandalous. And again, in the same way that we talked about the reaction to Charlie Kirk's assassination being perhaps an impetus for some good, this really puts things on the table. And I'm hoping that people realize, and I hope the Vatican is realizing, you can't just, you know, not pay attention to who's applying to come in and what they're going to do when they get there.
I want to move on now. Before we move on to this China topic, I have to mention our sponsor, the folks at Taylor Fergon Capital Management, Faith, Family, and Finances. I want to thank them for supporting our live Prayerful Posse event last week in Arizona. Be sure to visit them, taylorfergon.com. If you have any investment questions or family financial needs, they can help you. And you can support our work by donating at raymondarroyo.com. Father Gordon Chang, I want to move to China and foreign policy here. This week it was announced that Pope Leo has suppressed 2 Chinese dioceses established by Pope Pius XII in the 1940s. He also erected a new diocese, the Diocese of Zhangjiakou. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This is a diocese created by the Communist Party. Gordon, what does the acquiescence of the Holy See to the Chinese government mean in your mind? What does it indicate?
It means that the Chinese now are not only arrogant, but they think that they can get their way and they can force the church to do what it wants. You know, there's always been a question of the boundaries of these dioceses, and Beijing won. Pope Leo gave them what they wanted. And the other thing that I found really distressing, Raymond, was that there was no mention in the official announcement of Bishop Augustine Choi Tai, who has been detained by Chinese authorities since 2021. And there are reports that he has been forced into hard labor. So there needs to be an official announcement of this. The Pope needs to make sure that he is freed. And also all the other Catholics and Christians who have been disappeared and put into these labor camps for no reason but their faith.
And Gordon, this is really tied. We should explain to people, and before I get into the nitty-gritty of these dioceses, there is a China Vatican Pact that was crafted in 2018 by Pope Francis and the still sitting, amazingly, Secretary of State in the Vatican, Cardinal Pietro Parolin. They crafted this with China, and it gave the CCP, the Chinese authorities, say over the selection of bishops, if not the approval of them. Why is that such a bad idea at this point? Have they learned anything? Have we learned anything in the ensuing years?
Well, we've learned that the Communist Party failed to honor its part of the agreement, which was really one-sided in favor of the party. The other thing we learned was that the Vatican doesn't learn, because that 2018 agreement has been extended, most recently in October of last year. And we also learned that the Communist Party now has extraordinary influence and leverage over the church. I'm not a Catholic, but I do go to Catholic services because my family is. And the one thing that I've been taught by my wife is that martyrdom is central to Catholicism. And what this agreement has done, and you guys can correct me because you know more about theology than I ever will, but what this agreement has done is taken away the possibility of martyrdom from Catholics. And that is wrong. No one wants a Catholic to suffer, or anybody else for that matter, but the point is that some people need to stand up for their faith, and when they do, this agreement undermines them entirely, and that's just wrong.
Yeah. Father, lean into that. What does it mean? What are the importance, A, of martyrs, and B, a vibrant expression of a faith, even in a repressive place like China?
Yes, well, of course, the ancient phrase dating from the 1st century is that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of Christians. And where the church has been persecuted is where it grows. I mean, that's what happened in Rome. That's what caused Rome eventually to convert, in effect. On the question of, I mean, there's nothing stopping people from standing forth as martyrs now. I mean, you have a Cardinal Zen in Hong Kong. Now, the only reason he hasn't been martyred is because the Chinese haven't directly martyred him. But he's certainly there and available. Jimmy Lai is another one, and there are countless others, and those we don't know about. So let me just back up for a moment and say that I agree with everything that Gordon has said with regard to this agreement, and it really predates that, even to the pontificate of Benedict, where that Chinese letter, the letter to China, came out.
Yes.
I remember Zen was very concerned about that, and again, Parolin was involved in the drafting of that. And I think all of that is the case. But to go back to what I was saying earlier, we have to remember the backdrop of this. This is a new pontificate, and the China thing is enormously important for any number of reasons, not to mention the numbers of people that are involved. And I think I think this realignment of the diocese was along the lines of the geography that the Communist Party has set up, the new boundaries of different localities, and so that the Vatican went along with that. What I don't think is that the Pope yet has delved into this, and I can't help but think that this is one of the first things on his agenda as he's putting his arms around. He's been in audiences constantly. He just had a few weeks in Castel Gandolfo to kind of look at things. And I don't think he's going to act dramatically in this. It doesn't seem to be his personality. And I think he has... You remember the advice that he gave to the bishop in... was it Charlotte in South Carolina? Yeah. And this is Prevost giving the advice to the bishop going in, don't do anything for a year. Get to know what's going on and then make decisions. Of course, not that the bishop abided by that.
He didn't listen, no.
Not at all. And now he's got a bigger mess.
That is insight into how he thinks. And maybe there's a waiting period.
I think so.
Yeah, but the problem here is, Father, just to play devil's advocate or maybe angel's advocate, the problem is there are countless souls being killed, imprisoned, and put under house arrest. And we're talking faithful bishops, Bishop Ma. I mean, I could run through the whole line, including our friend Jimmy Lai, who I'll get to in a moment. But I want to get into the implications of suppressing these two longstanding dioceses and replacing them with the Communist Party creation. For this reason, it's important. They suppressed, in doing so, they blew out the traditional boundaries that Pius XII had established. They're now cohering with cities as established by the Chinese communists. But more importantly, they have suppressed an underground faithful bishop. And that, it seems to me, is a major challenge that you just can't sit back and say, I'm going to pray at Castel Gandolfo and walk the gardens for a year to figure out what I do. Gordon Chang, I'll give you the first crack at that, and then I'll go to Father.
Oh, yeah, that's so critical because there are so many brave Catholics in China. And really, the Pope doesn't stand behind them. And that is a message that is, I think, undermines the church. My sense, Raymond, and I don't know this, but my sense is that, you have the underground Protestant congregations. They have, as the Father said, they have flourished because of persecution. I think what also is happening is that they're getting converts from the Catholic Church because the church has aligned with the Communist Party. And people understand they cannot pray in the patriotic Catholic Church because of various reasons. So I worry about that. I mean, I'm a Protestant, but the point is we shouldn't be seeing an erosion of Catholicism in China where it is just critical for people to adhere to.
Father Sirico, why is the Holy See, do you think, so ready to give in to the Communist Party? And why keep that secret Vatican-Chinese deal in place at all?
Well, again, I think we're talking about a transition here. And I suppose if you had been elected Pope, we would have seen a lot more action on this topic much
God help
quicker.
The church. But, okay.
But, I'm just thinking of myself, having been a pastor, coming into a situation, having to know all the nuances of the situation, where all the gears are and how you move a thing along. And with the greater worry of splitting the church, if we move to, I'm not talking about just China here, but if you move too preemptorily, like, changing course in a ship, it has to go around in order to go the other way. It can't just turn on a dime. And I'd like to have this conversation a year from now and see what has happened.
Gordon, what do we know about this Chinese deal with the Vatican? I mean, I know there's a shroud of silence, and I know it's a secret deal. But in the way it's played out, what do we know?
Well, the way it's played out is that the Communist Party has violated the terms that we know about in terms of bishops and the way the faith, what Catholics can do in China. The Communist Party has basically said nobody under the age of 18 may, attend services and all the rest of it. And the Vatican has agreed to that. So there's a lot, of course, that we don't know. But the point is that the terms that are public, the Communist Party has openly violated them. And this is the important point. The Vatican has not complained.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, does it, Father, I'm going to tie this in. Does this partially explain the Vatican's silence surrounding the case of our friend Jimmy Lai? I interviewed Sebastian Lai, Jimmy's son, and Jimmy Lai, for those of you who don't know, media magnate. Imagine him as sort of the Rupert Murdoch of Hong Kong. He was a media magnate, owned a paper. He ran articles that covered the democracy movement, and for that, he and his staff was arrested and the entire operation shut down.
Yeah.
Rather than leave town, get out, he's a UK citizen, he stayed there. And he's now been imprisoned, and his trial just ended for allegedly violating a national security law. Father, your take on the Vatican's silence about this very big case of not only an outspoken democracy advocate, but a renowned Catholic in Hong Kong and China.
Well, let me begin by reminding, I don't have to remind you, I'm heavily invested in this. I went to Hong Kong a year and a half ago at some risk, in order to let Jimmy know that his friends had not abandoned him. I have been a steady critic in the movie that I produced, The Hong Konger, and in my writings and in public statements, all that. So you know where I'm at on this topic. But when you say this, the silence of the Vatican, the public silence of the Vatican has been deafening for the last, since the secret deal was done. I can't help but think, and that's all I can say right now, that there are private, direct cautions being offered to the communists about a need for a direction change. And that's why I say, to speak out about even Jimmy, I would like to see the Pope do something. If not say free Jimmy Lai, which of course I would love, to give some indication in that great Roman manner of his concern, his paternal concern for the situation. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see something along those lines. We just need, and Gordon, you would know how to read the subtleties better than I in this regard. I might know how to do it from the Roman point of view, but from the Chinese point of view, you know the delicacy of how Xi must think of his dignity and his pride.
And his stature on the world stage. But this is precisely, Father, why, and Gordon, you can chime in on this, this is precisely why some statement, even a nuanced one from Rome, would shine light and shame Xi. And I was stunned. Gordon, I interviewed Sebastian Lai, Jimmy Lai's son, a few weeks ago, and I asked him point blank on air, you can look it up, has the Vatican reached out to you? He ruefully said no. He's had no communications with anyone at the Vatican, which I was shocked by, to be honest.
Yeah, well, there's a sense, and this is not just the church, it's, governments all over the place, that the only way you can have constructive dialogue with the Communist Party is behind the scenes because they get very upset. Well, the point is, many countries, the Vatican is included, has had these discussions with China, and they have been unsatisfactory. I think what you need to do is you need to confront the Chinese in public, because then they really worry. And there's a risk in that. There's no doubt there's a risk in that. But clearly what people have been doing and what the Vatican has been doing just hasn't worked. So people need to try something new. As I said, no guarantee of success, but at least it may be successful.
And Gordon, I agree with you. We need to abandon this Casaroli form of diplomacy that failed in Eastern Europe and replace it with a John Paul II style diplomacy that did confront this. And I think that is absolutely what is needed.
Yeah. And Gordon, Pope Leo, and I want to circle the story here, bring it full circle. Pope Leo recognized a Father Wang Zhengui as the new bishop of this diocese that he created. Now, this priest is a longtime Chinese apparatchik, and according to The Pillar and other publications, The Pope did this while suppressing an underground bishop. What's the message to the Chinese communists in this?
Oh, it's just
From the
the
Vatican
message is that the Vatican has surrendered to Xi Jinping, and they're going to just press the advantage because you don't get anything in return for something like that. The problem is that they will just go further and further, and until the Vatican stands up and pushes back.
Well, Gordon, you see the chatter online. I mean, people online have whispered to me it's money, that the Chinese are giving the Vatican a lot of money. Do you believe that?
You know, I don't think so. I mean, that would not be the way the party would operate in this case. I just don't know, but that strikes me as not being true.
I haven't heard a thing about that. I haven't heard a thing about that in Rome, in any of the circles that I operate in. In terms of these changes and the bishop's appointment, all that was in the pipeline.
Yeah.
A lot went into the negotiation of that, and for that to have been disrupted would have required a lot of knowledge and understanding on the part of the Pope to see, if I do this, what happens that, before he has the opportunity to build the entire architecture of whatever trajectory he is going to initiate.
Yeah, well, this is the danger, of course, of leaving the same, captains in place as you come in as commander. I mean, and the Pope has done that. He kind of allowed all these people in place. But many of these people were the agents of the chaos and the difficulty that we're living through, not only vis-a-vis China, but vis-a-vis the liturgy, the marriage. Basic doctrine is up for grabs. So, look, I get it. The Pope has a lot of fires he needs to put out. But if you don't have control of your stations, that's impossible. Describe the Sinization process that we've been seeing in Catholic practice, Gordon, in China. I want to get into this because I don't think people understand. It's not just appointment of bishops or a patriotic church, which is a government-subscribed and monitored church in the Catholic sense. What have they done to actually Chinese, if you will, Sionize the content of the church, what it's teaching, what's being said?
Well, the images of Jesus have been replaced by images of Xi Jinping. Crosses have been taken down. Whole churches have been demolished. And in terms of doctrine and what is written, it has been totally changed so that it would be unrecognizable to someone who knows the Bible. Basically, God has been taken out of the Bible as the Communist Party has written it. So it's been a revolution in a sense, where it's become communism, not Catholicism.
Father Sirico?
I think that's true.
Details? Yeah.
No, I think that's very true. And when I was in Hong Kong, I spoke to a number of people who were very concerned about what was going on in Hong Kong. There's this bringing of the seminarians and the priests and the nuns from Hong Kong to China to undergo this kind of Sinization seminars, so to speak. They've even changed the text of Scripture.
Yeah, I knew that.
What you're pointing to here is absolutely right and of great concern. It's a form of apostasy that's being foisted upon the people. The people I've talked to, however, even if they're somewhat discreet, and the entire bulk of the Chinese people, every now and then you see an eruption and then they retreat. So this may be a cultural thing that I'm not, in my Italian home, you just have it all out, just the way we're having it out now. But I sense that the Asian approach is very different, but it's bubbling. It's obviously bubbling.
Well, you can't pervert the Scriptures. Once the Word of God is corrupted, what's the game? I mean, that's the whole game.
Right.
It's the conveyance of the Word of God. When that's corrupted and perverted, it seems to me your church follows suit pretty quickly. Father, before I let you all go, what is the state of Jimmy Lai? The trial is over. They had this kangaroo trial. The poor man's been in solitary for years now. He's 77 years old, in not great health. What do we know?
Well, we know that they put a heart monitor on him. That's why the closing arguments were postponed 2 days in order to fit him with a heart monitoring device. I know that he has diabetes, and he just looks weakened. So I mean, this is getting bad, and Sebastian, of course, is indefatigable in his father's defense and has really attracted a lot of support around the world. Mm-hmm. And I happen to know the family is praying. I mean, seriously, this is the real thing, and they understand that it's the real thing.
Yeah. Gordon, recently the UK government, you've heard a few little comments here and there, but nothing full-throated. Jimmy Lai is a UK citizen. Where are they on this? I know Donald Trump has mentioned that he should be freed. Yeah, the UK government has, from the very beginning, has been very quiet. And only in the last month or so have you heard anything from the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. In contrast, President Trump actually came out and said, we're going to try and free Jimmy Lai as a part of the trade negotiations. Trump said, we may not be successful, but we're going to try. And that's important. That shows the commitment of the United States to freeing Jimmy. Yeah. No, and it's an important, and he represents something so important, not only culturally, but I think spiritually, for a very beleaguered and persecuted people. Well, Father Robert Sirico, Gordon Chang, our honorary posse, thank you both for being here, and we will leave it there. And if you want more Arroyo Grande Prayerful Posse, subscribe to the Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube or our podcast, wherever you get yours. On behalf of our gallivanting posse who's away for the week, and Gordon Chang, Father Robert Sirico, until the posse rides again, stay the course, follow the light. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Arroyo Grande is produced in partnership with iHeart Podcasts and Divine Providence Studios, and is available on the iHeart Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.